we can get the meeting started.
We got the mayor here.
Roll call's been taken.
Yes.
All right.
Approval of the minutes of the September 8th, 2016 regular meetings. They are in your packet. Move to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Second?
Thank you. Have a motion and a second. Are there any corrections, changes? Hearing none, I call the question. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. I'm sensing a lack of enthusiasm this morning. Let's get on it here. Helmet shield presentation to firefighter Stephen Annan, based on successful completion of his probationary period. Oh, my God. And all the, talk about unexpected, huh? Congratulations, Stephen.
Thank you, sir.
And this is something that you do something with. I'm not quite sure what.
Put it on my helmet.
Okay.
Thank you.
You know, we should all get to see him with that on his helmet.
Well, come back later today, I'm sure it'll be on.
Yeah.
Take a picture and send it to you.
Facebook.
What, in the probationary year, what's on your helmet?
Label.
I see.
Blank and it's just a label.
Okay.
It just says guy.
This is a big step then, isn't it? Yeah. Stephen, congratulations. Approval of the fire department bills. Scott,
Alright.
you're
Yep. I am dealing with this today. You have two sets of bills in front of you, both are signed by Commissioner Keough. Just two things that Chief Haight wanted me to bring forward. On page 5K, you'll see a payment for $1,862 to PK Safety. And that was for our confined space communications equipment that had been broken, destroyed, out of date, all sorts of things. And on page 5L, a $3,000 charge to TAPCO for the Opticom system for the new aerial. The Opticom is our vehicle preemption system, so we can control the lights as we go on our emergency responses. So I'll entertain any questions and ask that you place on file.
Oh, we do more than place on file. Any questions for Deputy Chief?
Motion to approve. Second?
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. No additional comments or questions? This is a roll call vote. Gershman?
Yes.
Miller?
Yes.
Franklin?
Yes.
Myers?
Yes.
Keel, yes. And next we go on to the police department bills. Chief?
Yes, good morning. Two sets of bills in front of you, both signed by Commissioner Gershman, one on the 7th of September, one on the 21st of September. What I'd like to bring to your attention is on 6C. We had one of our squad changeovers. We go through, we change over a couple new squads, replacing the old ones every year. This was the first time we had put online one of our Ford Interceptors or Explorers. It's all-wheel drive SUV. Was a little bit cheaper than the Chevy Tahoes, but yet all-wheel drive, where the Chevy Tahoes were just two-wheel drive. So far, I bring that to your attention because so far, those that have driven it like it. They like the handling. They like the amount of space that was in there. That was one concern that we had initially, was the amount of interior space was somewhat reduced from what the Tahoes were. But so far, so good. So bring that to your attention. Also on 6F, we had purchased some new patches, uniform patches, and also had some services done with uniforms for our auxiliary officers. We wanted to bring them in line with the new patches that the police department, or the police officers had on their uniforms and the ordnance officers had on their uniforms. So the auxiliary patches that matched their uniforms were purchased and sewn on to their uniforms. And on 6J, we had requested a budget resolution to purchase canine stuffed animals for the canine program as a fundraiser. That payment went out to the company, and we're anticipating a turnaround of about 8 to 12 weeks to get those stuffed animals back so that we can start selling them, and all those proceeds would then go back to not only replenish the canine fund, but to grow it a little bit with a little bit of profit that's made on the selling of those animals. Be happy to answer any other questions, otherwise look for approval on those bills.
Motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you. Any comments or questions about the police department bills? Hearing none. All those in favor, nope, it's a roll call. Myers,
Yes.
Franklin,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Gershman,
Yes.
Keo, yes. Fire department activities, training reports and correspondence packet. Scott?
See, before I asked to place on file, just so you would get in the mindset that you have to do the roll call, and now we can really place on file, right? You're welcome. All right, so in front of you, you have our activities, training reports, and correspondence package for the month. Page 7I, we received a check for $7,731.07 from the state of Wisconsin. That is for our funding assistance program for the ambulance service. It's an annual payment that we receive, and we got it midway through September. Page 7L and M, two donations of totaling $550 were received by the department that are going towards our fire extinguisher prop that firefighter Brian Barnes is heading up. Those will be put into the donation account. And other than that, I do not believe there was much more in there, so I'll answer any questions and ask that you place on file.
Fire extinguisher prop?
Yep, it's a training prop. So we can teach fire extinguishers, we can work with businesses and teach them how to properly put out fire using an extinguisher, not using real fire, so it's very safe.
That's
Yeah, exactly.
good. Yeah. Any questions? Well, hearing none, we'll place on file. Right?
Yeah,
I didn't mean to disturb your reverie.
not my turn.
Oh, God, what is it? A new truck presentation by Deputy Chief Dolans, and that has to do with the material we received.
Correct. I was asked to provide an update on where we are with the purchase of our new aerial platform truck. As you recall, in 2011, the commission adopted a vehicle replacement program. So we will be replacing our 1993 aerial platform. We developed a committee back in 2015. 2016 is the year we're supposed to replace the aerial. The committee was comprised of a member of each of the three shifts, and then Lieutenant Breyer was the chair of the committee, and then I was selected on the committee from the management side. We met several times, developed and crafted what we wanted this new truck to look like. We contacted vendors. We had vendors come in and show us. I think we had 8 vendors, and about 4 or 5 of them actually brought in trucks down here. We got to look at the trucks. The crews got to look at the trucks. We went out to one manufacturer, looked at trucks in their facility, went through the manufacturing plant. And then Lieutenant Esker, who was on the committee, and myself went down to FDIC. It's a fire department instructors conference, one of the largest displays of vehicles. It's held at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. The stadium's full, the convention centers, there's hundreds of trucks there. In 2016, Lieutenant Breyer and one of the other firefighters, Firefighter Mueller, went down to Indianapolis, did the same thing. We looked at the vendors. We met with one vendor who assisted us in crafting the specs. The committee met after that. The specs were gone through to remove any proprietary items to that manufacturer that assisted us. We put out bids to 8 separate manufacturers, and I have them listed in your packet. We did only get 2 bids back, one from Pearson Manufacturing and one from Rosenbauer Manufacturing and Jefferson Fire, which is the vendor here in Wisconsin. As you can see in your packet, the bids came off. The Pierce was $1,108,900, and the Rosenbauer came back at $969,000 and $878. We reviewed the specs. Pierce, they were the manufacturer that assisted us in crafting the specs. They had no exceptions in the bid. They fully met the bid. Rosenbauer listed 30 exceptions to the process, and I have a copy of that here if you're interested in those. Most of them were just proprietary items in the way they manufacture the rig versus the way Pierce manufactures the rig. So the committee reviewed the specs. That took probably about a month. Specs are quite lengthy. I think it was 156 pages or something. So we reviewed those, had discussions. Committee had a final meeting of which Chief Haight was a part. We went around the room, gave our pros and cons, each individual member did, and the committee actually voted 3-2 to forward to Chief Haight to buy the Pierce rig at the higher bid. The committee, then disbanded. Chief Haight went and looked at the manufacturers. We did have some concerns about the Rosenbauer, just mostly because none of our neighboring departments have them. They are bigger in the south. Jefferson Fire, the dealer, just became a dealer for Rosenbauer the past few years. So we had some questions about, we have never worked with the rig, and the dealer, was a longtime dealer that we knew, but didn't have much experience with the Rosenbauer. They were a new Rosenbauer dealer. So Chief Haight went and took the references. I think he called about 6 references, different departments in south part of the state. They were very pleased with the unit. We looked at the company, Rosenbauer. They're actually the largest fire truck manufacturer in the world. They produced rigs big in Europe. They came into the United States about the late 70s and are producing rigs here since. They produce them in, the chassis manufacturer is in South Dakota. The aerial components are manufactured in Snyder, Nebraska. And they bring them together in Minnesota is where they do the final assembly. So they're local, they have a good history. Chief Haight's responses from the departments that do use these rigs, and we went with departments who had multiple purchases of the rigs, and they were very pleased with them. I know when they were here and we looked at them, they appeared to be good quality. We had some questions about the pump that they build. They build their own pump. We didn't have a lot of experience or any experience with their pump, but during, they were ultimately selected, and during the build meeting, we were able to actually upgrade the pump to a 2,000 gallon per minute pump and go with a Hale, which is a well-known pump that we have here. So Chief Haight presented to you to go with the Rosenbauer, and I fully support that decision. I mean, we've done our due diligence, looked at this company. They're a good, solid company. They make a good rig, and I think we're very excited to have it. But short of having all that information on them and not having experience with them, I think we've overcome those obstacles. So we did sit down for a build meeting, put it together, and as I said, we got some upgrades on the pump for the same price, just a little different configuration, and I think it's going to be a good rig. It's scheduled to be here probably August of next year, and they have a 1-year build time on them, so that's why the delay. But I think it's going to be a good, solid rig. I did include some photos. The first photo is one from Viroqua, Wisconsin, and I did get to look at this rig extensively. And the second photo is not the type of aerial we're getting, but it's in the color scheme that we're getting. And I also included some information on Rosenbauer. They explain about the company, how long they've been around, where they operate, how many rigs they produce. So with that, I can take any questions.
Are there any questions?
Sure. Deputy Chief. Jerry?
Our used one, do we put that up for sale then? Is that, I'm sure this has been answered before and I just don't remember.
We originally asked about maybe doing a trade-in. Nobody does trade-ins, but they'll hook us up with a national broker who will actually put it out. And values on them, because it doesn't have a pump, will probably be under $25,000 for that rig. So, but we'll see through the broker. Hopefully we can get more for it. It's not having a pump on it really hurts its value with other departments.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
So it was 3-2 to go with the Pierce
Right.
originally, and then Chief Haight did some further research. Did it go back to the full committee, or did Chief Haight just make the decision to go with the lower priced
Well,
unit?
he talked to the committee individually. We didn't meet, but he talked with individual members and explained his reasoning. And it pretty much amounted to $109,000 difference, so.
So for $109,000, you still felt you had gotten the unit that you needed
Yes.
with a few extras?
Yes, I mean, the only difference, actually, we have some upgrade features that Pierce didn't do, which includes I'm blanking on the name of it. It's a green technology, IRT, I think they call it. And what it does is it actually has a 20 horsepower motor and generator that will automatically shut the unit down when it's sitting and idling on scene, but it'll run the lights, air conditioning, power out of the outlets. And then if anybody goes to kick in the aerial unit or the pump, the motor will kick back on. So it's a way of saving energy and not having that big unit just idling there, when we're at a fire, so. Yeah,
Exactly, yes.
yeah, but, that technology's been around a long time. It's something that we did want on the rig, that we pulled from this. Pierce was offering to do it with just a standalone generator, but it wouldn't, you could turn the engine off and then turn on the generator, and then it would power those things. So it wasn't automatic cycling on and off as it needed. If it ever draws too much load, the engine will automatically kick on, even if we're not using those other features.
I know that the purchase order's been let, but for my information, what brand of engine's in that truck?
It is a Cummins
Okay. What about transmission?
Allison.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, most of the components, when they build, Pierce builds their own chassis, Rosenbauer builds their own chassis, but Pierce will do a Cummins or a Detroit diesel. Most of the other manufacturers do just the Cummins motor, but it'll be 500 horsepower Cummins and an Allison transmission. Even the axles are from a different manufacturer, so
No, I
the main
understand.
components of the drivetrain are from other manufacturers.
Serviceability is gonna be a big issue.
Randy, did you have something?
That was basically the same question, just because we're buying a product that's probably got a little bit less market share. Is it going to be availability of parts, or is that going to be a little bit more of an issue?
Features in Rosenbauer's favor, I think Pierce builds a lot of their own parts, and they have a large parts facility right in Appleton, so it's not that big of a deal. But one of Rosenbauer's selling points is that they use a lot of off-the-shelf components, that we can go to Napa, CarQuest, and pick those parts up. So, makes it a little easier for us without having to ship in parts, that are like wiper blades, It's nice to buy them off the shelf versus having to order them from the manufacturer.
All right, thank you.
Anything else? I have a question about process. This shows roll call. What do we need to approve?
No. I'm sorry.
I think we already bought the truck, so.
I think,
Yeah.
Oh, okay. then we-
You already approved the
Yeah.
purchase, this is
Okay.
just an
Yeah.
update of,
Yeah, just have-
so I thought that was the case. I wanted to be sure. We don't need a vote here because we've already voted to approve purchasing the truck. This was an update on the equipment that we've already approved buying. Okay, we'll go on to item 9, approval to implement EMS service upgrade to critical care paramedic. Scott, I know that's you.
That's me. As everybody knows, the clinic is in the process of trying to purchase the hospital. And when that happens, Spirit may or may not be available for interfacility transfers. We've approached the clinic and let them know that we are interested in performing interfacility transfers for them. In order to do that, we need to move up to the critical care paramedic level. Critical care has a few additional skills, some other medications, ventilations, specialized training in order to do these. What I'm looking for is your approval to submit my request to the state for upgrading to the critical care level. We tentatively have a class planned for January through April. And that's all at the discretion of passing of the budget, of course. We haven't committed to mid-state, but we have those tentative dates set. It's a big process to go through to upgrade, but it's one that will benefit not only during our 911 calls, but our transfers, our intercepts, any other calls that we interface. Right now, we run into issues periodically with patients that we're not familiar with their condition or the equipment that they use, and this will give the paramedics the additional knowledge. So I'm looking for your approval to move forward on submitting the feasibility study and the operational plan to the state, and hopefully they will approve it as well.
Let me ask a question first. This is in the 2017 budget?
Correct.
Okay, so it's in the budget that we have already approved. All right.
Correct.
Motion to approve? Second, thank you. Are there questions for Deputy Chief Owen? Well, if there are no questions, let me do the roll call. Gershman?
Yes.
Miller?
Yes.
Franklin?
Yes.
Meyer?
Yes.
Keel? Yes. You're very welcome. Item 10 on the agenda is the Shaw Recognition Plaque. We'll save that until November. And Chief Haight thought that putting it off by a month would be a better way to handle it. So we're at Police Department activities, training reports, and correspondence packet.
Yes, it's a pretty busy month in September for us. What I'd like to bring to your attention is just a couple of highlights. On both September 6th and September 14th, Officer Topness, who's one of our trainers in active shooter response, performed a couple presentations at Norwood Health Center, should their staff ever be faced with an active shooter situation. Officer Topness and Sergeant Esser have really done a great job reaching out to the community and offering training to employers, to daycares, to schools, to churches, as it relates to a proper way to respond to an active shooter situation, to save lives, to get out of harm's way, et cetera. And I guess I open this up to the community, to whoever is in need or desiring to have that training brought in-house. We have resident experts, I would say, that can do a great job in training your staff, your employees, to how to properly respond and what steps to take to, I guess, protect and save lives until law enforcement can get there. And a lot of it talks about how we respond, just so that there's some knowledge there as to what to expect upon law enforcement arrival. So that happened on the 6th and 14th. Also on the 11th and the 18th, we had a local individual come in and perform some autism training to our officers. This is a kind of a refresher course for some. Harry Dolans comes in, he has an autistic son, and he comes in and gives this training to our officers. I think he also comes and does it for the sheriff's department, possibly the fire department, and just how to properly respond to individuals with autism that are suffering from autism, and what their needs are and how to respond accordingly to those needs. Some of our officers had never had this training before because they're newer. Some of them, like I said, it was just a refresher, but it's always good to get those refreshers when it's a low frequency but potentially a high risk situation based on someone's state of mind at the time. On the 13th through the 15th, Detective Jason Parks had attended a prevention conference in Buffalo, New York. It was a national conference. One of the, I guess, benefits, one of the many benefits in partnering with the clinic and the Marshfield Area Coalition for Youth is oftentimes just to make what we're doing here better and cutting edge. they're willing to pay for certain conferences and airfare, et cetera, for our officers and staff to attend and just be in the know when it comes to what's happening in the world of AODA and prevention work. I think we're very fortunate to have that relationship with the clinic and with Marshfield Area Coalition for Youth, and we're very appreciative of when they help us to attend some of these financially. And then lastly, I was going to bring up on the 29th of September, we had a group of individuals, a group of officers attend a lethality assessment program up in Rice Lake. We were, I guess, educated on this by Personal Development Center. It was a program out of the state of Maryland that they wanted us to start maybe looking at and partnering with PDC in bringing this type of assessment program locally. What it does is it tasks officers with going through a questionnaire with a victim of domestic violence, and it gauges what the lethality is of their situation and how high a risk they are, you know, in maybe having their domestic partner become violent or reoffend against them. It helps us to be able to make an immediate decision as to maybe recommendations that we make to the DA's office, but more importantly, it helps PDC in getting a protective plan in place and kind of rates the danger that that individual's in. From my understanding, the feedback I received from those officers, it's a great program. It'll maybe add for each domestic response that we have, it might add 15 to 20 minutes more paperwork onto that officer. The majority of it falls on PDC as it relates to having a 24-hour hotline, being available to have an advocate come out onto the scene to start building that person up again and empowering them to follow through with maybe the charges against that individual, because a lot of times in domestic violence cases, they want the situation stopped right now, but they don't like somebody who's a victim of domestic violence doesn't necessarily like the long-term ramifications. And a lot of times that domestic partner will have, I guess, put so much pressure on the victim to where they feel like it's their fault that now this person was arrested, that now they might be missing days of work, and there's often recanting or backing up of the initial charges or complaint that they wanted to file. So having that 24-hour hotline and the advocates coming out onto the scene in those situations for that empowerment piece, that falls on PDC and them going through a more extensive questionnaire within 24 hours of that incident happening, just to gauge. So the feedback was good, and it's a program that we'll probably try for about a year or two and then reassess it to see if we still feel that it's a benefit to the community. I would be happy to answer any questions you have on other activities we took part in. Otherwise, I look for you to place those on file.
Comments or questions? Okay, thank you, Chief. Anything in the crime reports that's worthy of note for this month?
Actually, I forgot to bring up just two things in the correspondence we had. We just received money from two entities, one being Main Street Marshfield. That was for services that we provided at Hub City Days for extra security. What we do is we had two officers there from roughly, I believe, noon or 1 until probably about midnight on Saturday. The agreement we had is that we would supply one officer to them and free of charge, and that they would pay for one officer free of charge, or they would pay for one officer on overtime. So that's what that check is from Main Street Marshfield. And then also Wisconsin Surplus. Lieutenant Larson had listed one of the vehicles that we had confiscated in a drug arrest. And that vehicle we had turned around, it was I can't remember the year, but it was probably about a 15 to 20-year-old Ford Focus. and we had sold that for just under $1,000 through Wisconsin surplus. We get to keep half of that money and put that in that 206 fund to where we can spend that money on other investigations. Then half of that money goes to the state and goes into the state school fund. So that check came in this month as well. As it relates to the crime reports, nothing substantial to bring to your attention. I've been working with crime reports to try to become more accurate because our in-house records weren't necessarily matching up with the records that were showing out on some of these graphs. I might have mentioned this at the last meeting, but what we realized was it was counting call for service information. So whatever our secretaries and dispatchers were entering into the system, it was counting that for arrests, but it was only counting one. If there was 3 arrests in a case, it was only counting one of them. So what we actually need them to do is upload the arrest data, because then each of the individual arrests would be tabulated. As an example, and I think I had mentioned this before, like on the traffic report on 12B, about halfway down, it talks about driving under the influence. It shows 86 arrests in 2015 to date, and 62 in 2016. We actually have probably close to 90 arrests for drinking and driving this year, 90 to 95. The reason that it says 62 is that's 62 offenses for drunk driving, and that's the only arrest we made. The other 36 or the other 34 arrests that aren't showing were maybe a flee, a pursuit that the officer had, and then the drunk driving was subsequent to that. So it's counting the pursuit primarily, the OWI secondarily. So then on the graph, it's only coming, it's only giving, I guess, the department credit for the pursuit. Also, if we had a drug arrest on a OWI, it would consider the drug arrest more substantial than the OWI. So our drug arrest would be counted, the OWI wouldn't. So hopefully by the next meeting, we'll have all of the arrest data uploaded into the system. I could then print that out, and the numbers should line up perfectly with where we are to date as it relates to arrests, and this will be a little bit more accurate. Otherwise, there's nothing significant to bring to your attention as it relates to the crime reports.
Any questions? Okay. Item 13 on the agenda is review and approval police hiring process sponsorship proposal. And again, Chief Graham said that's yours.
I had sent out an email just as an informational as it relates to something I'd brought up last meeting. What I'd suggested is just to broaden that pool of candidates that we have applying for a position of police officer, that we consider the potential of sponsoring an individual through the academy if they don't already have that certification, which would be a 720-hour or 18-week commitment that individual would have to make. I had listed some pros and cons to looking at something like that, and also I had done some research since our last meeting as to other agencies that are taking part in this. Some agencies that I heard back from that currently do this is Wood County Sheriff's Department, City of Washburn, the City of River Falls, Whitefish Bay, Brown Deer, Prairie du Chien, Eagle River, as you know, and that's kind of across the board, departments that are roughly our size, some larger, some smaller. And the feedback I received is that they like the fact that they're able to sponsor an individual if that individual needs sponsoring, and that that it's a benefit to both the community and the department. This wouldn't necessarily say that we're just going to look at an individual who needs sponsoring. We're going to look at all applicants and pick the best one. But like I said, this just opens up the potential of being able to look at more individuals. In the past, we've looked at the most hireable or the most desirable individual who's already gone through recruit school. Now we're looking at the most desirable individual, period. And if we need to sponsor them and put them through recruit school, we could do so. On average, 2 recruit schools are held at each tech college throughout the year, usually one that starts in August and runs through December, one that starts in January and runs through May. I spoke with individuals from both NTC and Wausau, as well as Mid-State Technical College in Wisconsin Rapids, received feedback from both of them. One of the things that they said where they're struggling is through their associate degree program, like Wisconsin Rapids, Mid-State, they have 58 spots allocated for individuals every year that want to start their criminal justice program with the associate degree. Out of those 58 spots this year, 27 were filled initially, 3 have dropped out, so they actually only have 24 people with 58 spots pursuing a degree in criminal justice. In the past, there used to be a wait list to this, and you might have to wait a semester or a year before you can get into the program. Now they can't even fill it. What that means, and out of those 24, according to the dean, he felt that probably 10 to 12 would eventually be police officers. He said the other 12 to 14 he does not feel are suitable for law enforcement police officer jobs, but they might do well as maybe a corrections officer or some other law enforcement related field. So that's giving us, like in this year, that's giving us and other area departments 12 individuals to more or less fight over. So my recommendation was to potentially offer sponsorship if an individual came forward needing that sponsorship. What I would recommend is that this person be placed on a contract. The contract would be something that would be drafted by the city attorney. Most contracts that I looked at, and I have some examples that were roughly about a 3-year contract, to where if that individual left to go to a different department or quit the training process just because they decided they didn't like it, that this legally binding contract would hold them accountable for a portion of the costs that were accrued in training them or in sponsoring them. If somebody successfully completes the training, the state of Wisconsin, the Department of Justice will reimburse the agency 100% for that training. So what would normally be a $5,500 investment, we are receiving that money back if the person successfully completes it. What I also learned is if the recruit schools, which is that 720-hour training, is if they are full locally, like if Wisconsin Rapids and Wausau is full, there's Chippewa Valley Technical College as well as Fox Valley Technical College that offer this. If we had to send somebody to one of those trainings just to get them on board as soon as possible, the state also picks up hotel costs, travel reimbursement for mileage, and meal costs. So those would be refunded back to us 100%. I see this as a good option. I see this as just expanding that pool of possible candidates. If we hired somebody that needed sponsorship, I feel we should pay them while they're attending this. That's the only cost that I see us incurring. That cost would, and that's something that I'm talking with HR and our local union about. I believe we could bring that person in at a lower cost than what a starting officer rate of pay is, because they're not officially an officer yet. They won't be an officer until they've attended the recruit school and they're sworn in as an officer. So I believe we could start them out monetarily at an amount lower than what our starting officer rate of pay is. And then once they successfully complete the training, then we could bump them up to that officer rate of pay once sworn in. Some of the cons with this, or the negatives, I guess, is that if somebody doesn't successfully complete the program based on dropping out, or if they would end up leaving to go to another agency after we've already brought them on and trained them, then there might be some small claims fees or some lawyer fees as it relates to pursuing that individual to receive that money back that they signed that legally binding contract on and would owe the city of Marshfield. Probably the biggest drawback in this is that if we would offer employment to somebody who needs sponsorship, it could delay actually having that person up and running by a couple months. The training is initially 18 weeks that we would send them to. It's only run twice a year. And so it would be 18 weeks that we don't have that person because they're at training. And then once they're out of training, then we would start our field training program with them in-house, which is about 16 weeks. So it would be roughly 32 to 34 weeks that we would not have that person on board, ready to work on their own. So it's adding an additional 18 weeks, I guess, onto that, not counting any time that we're waiting to get them into the recruit school. I don't see this being a frequent occurrence, but I guess I don't know because we haven't done it as far as hiring somebody that's not, that doesn't have that certification. But I see it as just opening that, broadening that scope of applicants that we have looking for a job in law enforcement. As I had mentioned previously, there's a handful of people that have come to me from the community thinking that this is a good time to get into the field of law enforcement and to be part of, leading that change that, that is necessary in the profession. People such as teachers, nurses have come to me and mentioned that they are intrigued with the profession. So I just see it as another opportunity to grow that pool of applicants and look for your approval to, I guess, put a program like this in place and just broaden that hiring pool. Be happy to answer any questions you have.
You're looking for approval. That means we need a motion to approve. Second?
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table to approve this program. Comments and questions?
I
from-
just got one question, Rick. So really, from the city standpoint, we're looking at maybe 18 weeks of some salary and benefits.
Correct.
Okay. And the field training, we're going to have that anyway, even if you hire somebody that's already certified.
Correct.
Oh,
Yeah, there's
so-
going to be that in-house training that we do with everyone. Sometimes it's abbreviated or shortened up a little bit if that person comes to us with full-time law enforcement experience already, or even some part-time experience. Oftentimes not. An example, when we hired somebody from Wood County Sheriff's Department, I believe their 16-week training program was only 8 or 10 weeks. So, I mean, it did abbreviate it quite a bit, and then they were able to go out on their own. But yeah, I mean, and again, we're still working on, the potential of paying them at a lower rate of pay, but if we were to pay them at, say, $15 an hour while they were attending training, the salaries alone, not including the benefits, would run about $10,000 over the course of that 18 weeks. If we had to pay them at the starting officer rate of pay, which is $22, obviously that would go up a little bit. But yeah, the salaries and benefits during that 18-week period of time would be the only thing that we would incur, because any mileage, like I mentioned, any mileage even to and from a local training would be reimbursed, on behalf of that individual that was attending the training. So if we were sending them down
Along
to
with the
Wisconsin
academy.
Rapids,
Okay.
we would get reimbursed as long as they had to drive more than 15 miles, we get reimbursed for mileage. Obviously, to either Wausau or Rapids is more. So we would get fully reimbursed for mileage, whether it was that individual submitting for reimbursement through us or whether it was us using a department vehicle to send them to the training. The state would reimburse us for that mileage.
Along with the academy tuition would,
Would be completely reimbursed,
Okay.
correct.
right. Okay, good.
Last month I had some concerns about this. First of all, we didn't have the whole commission here. And second of all, it went back to the original intent was to have people certified so we didn't have to pick up the tab of that certification. But with the points that you raised here, I guess it's a no-brainer. I think I could support that. But they're still they still have to qualify with 60-plus credits and college credits.
Correct, they would still have to qualify under the, minimums for hiring. They would need a valid driver's license, no domestic violence arrests, no felony convictions, 60 college credits, correct. Yeah, and we do obviously, prefer individuals who have an associate or master's degree. There's some preference as it relates to that, but we've hired many individuals, that just had 60 college credits. They were pursuing a criminal justice degree. One individual was pursuing his criminal justice degree, bachelor degree. He was like 10 credits short, was sponsored through the academy by a different agency, and was hired by us then. So, I mean, he never finished his bachelor degree, but yet he has since finished it. So that's just, one example of an individual that we've hired without a degree, but having the required amount of credits and receive sponsorship elsewhere.
There's still, it's still gonna be the same level of assessment, though, the psychological, the physical, the interviews, all that. They're certainly not gonna have the body of knowledge, because they haven't gone through class. Like, in the past, when we participated, we were able to, ask them questions relating to statute and such, situational. So some of that's gonna have to change a little bit, Rick, in
Right.
terms of how you evaluate people.
I actually had that listed as one of the cons is, revamping of our hiring process, but we've kind of already done that over the last probably 2 years. We've gotten away from some of those knowledge-based questions as it relates to the profession and just gone with more character-based questions. Challenging questions that anyone could face in just daily life, let alone, not just specifically the profession of law enforcement. One thing that we've done in the past is had the individuals take part in some scenarios, some use of force scenarios. If they go to the recruit academy, they do many scenarios, whether they pay for it themselves or whether that would be something that we're, sponsoring them in. I think we can still maybe do some tabletop scenarios, but maybe just, again, nothing that would necessitate use of force or arrest or any statute knowledge, but just maybe more interaction and interpersonal scenarios, just as to how they handle maybe, how they keep their calm when they're maybe dealing with somebody who's excited or is maybe talking irrationally or things like that. So I think we can still maybe run some scenarios, but more just ones based on verbals and nonverbals as it relates to actually taking physical action. But yeah, there's a couple of adjustments we'll probably make, but nothing that I think would tarnish what we're trying to do is hire the best person for the job.
I personally would like to sit through some of the interviews when we, if we look at some people from outside the profession. I think it would just be interesting as a commissioner to see what type of, how the process is going, and also what type of talent we're attracting in the department.
I
So,
think that's a great idea. Absolutely.
thank you.
Is there a limit to how many the state will reimburse in a year or a period of time?
No, there isn't. A lot of it is availability into that recruit academy. One thing, when I talked to Midstate out of Wisconsin Rapids and even to Wausau, they said we can reserve spots. We can hold 1 or 2 spots for each class and then relinquish those spots, as late as a month before the recruit academy would start. So we could always have spots available for us, so we wouldn't have to necessarily wait for 6 months or 8 months till the next academy comes around before we actually because that would be prohibitive to what we want to do, and that's getting the best person on board as soon as possible, so it doesn't affect staffing issues. So we can actually reserve those spots, but no, if we anticipated needing to hire 4 people in an upcoming year, we could reserve 4 spots, or 2 at each location or 4 at one location. And the state would reimburse those 100% as long as they successfully completed the academy.
And they reimburse it 100%? I mean, everything.
Yep.
Is it something they've been doing all along? Reimbursing communities for certification, or did they do it for a while and then not do it for a while, now they're doing it again, or historically all?
I learned, because we've never done this before, at least since I've been here. I know that years ago, prior to my hire, they had sponsored, the Marshall Police Department had sponsored individuals through academies. And some of our officers were actually in the minority when they went to an academy, put themselves through it. Usually those that were sponsored wore their uniforms, and they said often it was more people in the class wearing a uniform than not. But from my understanding, what I learned over the past couple weeks is that the state's been reimbursing departments all along once they successfully complete the academy. I don't know exactly how long they've been reimbursing the hotels and meals and those per diems as mileage, but all along I learned they've been reimbursing the department for sponsoring an individual.
Any additional questions? Motion on the table, it requires a roll call. Myers,
Yes.
Franklin,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Gershman,
Yes.
Keel, yes. You got it. How about a quick review of the restructuring idea?
I'm just going to briefly touch on this. It's still in the infancy stages, but it was brought to my attention that there may be benefit in having a second in command at the police department, a person that's solely looked at as second in command. We haven't looked at this a whole lot. I guess what I'm just looking for is permission to look at this if it would involve potential restructuring and creating a position of an assistant chief, or maybe other, and not necessarily adding a body or adding a position to the department, just maybe moving some individuals around. I just look for permission to continue investigating this with Human Resources, comparing to other agencies that are around us that have assistant chiefs. I've, over the last maybe week or so, have reached out to some who are comparable sizes to us, just to get a feel for what their structure is, just to make sure that our structure is appropriate and consistent with other agencies our size. So I guess I'm just looking for your approval to continue seeking information towards a possible restructure in the future of our agency.
Yes, Terry?
I would support that, but what I'd like to see is, so we can, something in written form that we can look at it and where else you've researched, and so we can, we got to do, if we're gonna make some changes like that, we've done the proper due diligence, but it's hard to make changes without sitting and being able to look at it, so we can ask constructive questions when you do something. But I would support the process to go ahead and look at it.
Yeah, I have no problem supplying you with anything that I come up with, and I'll make sure that it's to you in plenty of time for evaluation.
Yeah, just to follow up to Terry's comment, I think it's good to examine, the structure of the department, even ongoing, but I think to really take a hard look at it and see where responsibilities are at, and, in terms of how we compare to other departments, and I think that all sounds reasonable, but I agree with Terry, a little bit more, once we get to that process, I'm sure you'll be able to provide detail in terms of what you're recommending, so that would be great.
Definitely.
Any other comments? As a commissioner, I think it's very important that when you're not available, somebody is in charge. And whatever you do to reorganize, that's got to be part of the outcome. I don't, excuse me.
Yeah.
Well, when it comes down to it,
Otherwise, we get Martha back.
that's very true.
Martha was prior to Peggy, right?
Martha?
Marion.
Marion.
How could I forget?
Somehow it's often that way, isn't it?
Yeah, I know, the older you get.
Yeah. So I think the consensus of the commission is for you to go forward and come back to the commission with detail and rationale and so on. Upcoming Police and Fire Commission workshop, you've got this at the back of your packet. It's in Wisconsin Dells. The month before I came on the commission, there was a similar but briefer meeting in Wausau that I attended with Gary Jepson. It was very helpful. I'm tempted to have to look at the calendar and see if I can do this. But if any of the rest of you can, even if you've been on the commission for a long time, it's a great update and refresher and so on. And the police and fire departments have agreed to share the costs for us. They didn't know that. And then the last thing on the agenda, if Chief Grams is correct, the armored rescue vehicle should be behind the firehouse. And so if you've not seen it or had an opportunity to look in it or be in it, this is your chance. Terry, if you choose to pass on this, I think we'll all understand. Any other business to bring before the commission? There's no additional new or old business. I'll call the meeting adjourned.